because we spoke some months ago with Kin Lane, and our project is in his web. So the people here are coming to speak and to know what are you doing, what are your questions, and so on. Kin Lane is the boss of APIs, because he has a very a good blog, or very good blogs, and also he's an independent writer, so it's a good opportunity to have Kin here. He was the first speaker that confirmed his assistant to this event, and I think that his answer makes this event possible. And I think it's okay. It's all.
Very cool. How long do I have? So I can.
45 minutes.
45 minutes? Oh, well, I'll talk nice and slow so everyone can understand. I already introduced myself. So I'm going to talk about business of APIs. I probably should have said something in my intro, but I just open this up here. So I come at this from a little different than most people, and I have to answer to this a lot. I come at it from a business perspective, even though I'm a software engineer. So I've been developing databases for 20 years, since the 80s. And so I'm very intimate with building database-driven systems. And this is what brought me into APIs. I saw APIs coming in around 2003 to 2005. I started seeing Delicious, Flickr, and I saw the potential. I thought it was fun. But I really didn't get APIs until Amazon came out. And I was able to actually deploy global infrastructure using APIs, and not SOAP APIs, REST APIs. So at the time, don't let my look fool you. At the time, I worked for SAP, and I worked for Google, wore a suit, much like Andy. Didn't much look like Jesus back then. And I saw the potential for APIs. I saw iPhones coming out, and I looked at the space, and I saw a lot of technical folks talking about all the technical details. People arguing about REST. What is REST? What makes it RESTful? All of this. And I like to call those people Restafarians, because they're very religious about how they feel about the technology of APIs. So I saw that, and I saw no one's focusing on the business of APIs, focusing on how to sell your API, how to price your API, how to fund your API, how to market to developers. So I started focusing on the business, started studying how Google, how Amazon, how Facebook does what they do. And 3 years later, I'm doing the same thing. I've been doing this since 2010. And so I don't work for anybody. I don't have any product to sell you. My mission is to help people understand APIs and be the independent voice for APIs. So I'm not going to sell you anything. I'm not going to go into the technical details of APIs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to help you understand the whole space from the highest point of view. So remember, I study this. This is all I do 7 days a week. I don't do anything else. Sounds bad. No, I do other things. But this is pretty much what I do. So the history of APIs. I believe this is very important because a lot of developers, they show this part too. They're like, oh, I know about APIs. But really, we can learn a lot from the history of APIs and how we got to where we're at. And this will help us figure out where we can go next. So in studying, when I mean APIs is a very broad term, because there's hardware APIs been around for a long time. There's a lot of different types of APIs. When I talk APIs, I'm talking about a web API. I really don't care if it's RESTful. I'm talking just a web API. And web APIs have been around, so we're 2013, so about 13 years. It started with Salesforce, was one of the first players to come out with a kind of XML RPC, this approach. And then we had eBay, Amazon, and PayPal. So this is Amazon commerce. So this is all commerce. This is about kind of the original vision of the internet and selling products, but through an API. And this is what allowed eBay to grow their auction world. This allowed Amazon to grow their commerce world. So APIs were really made commerce be distributable in the early 2000s. But because of certain things, we really didn't see APIs go that far when it came to commerce. We really didn't see it go anywhere until social happened. So Flickr and Delicious. And when I saw Delicious, it was the first time that APIs and web APIs really clicked. I was able to go to the URL and just change it and get an XML listing of my bookmarks. So it was the same web infrastructure that all the other websites are using. But because I understood that I was a programmer, I could hack the URL a little bit and get an XML representation of all of my bookmarks, dump that, and then use that programmatically. So that was very important. That was an awakening moment for me. I was like, what if the whole web is like this? What if we could do this with any site that we go to? What if we could immediately get a JSON? I didn't know about JSON back then, but an XML version of this website. Very powerful. And then with Twitter and Facebook, we saw this grow into more of a platform play. APIs drove the Facebook growth. APIs drove the Twitter growth. I know a lot of people think Twitter is more of a company than just its API, but really it grew on the back of its API. Twitter didn't have any clients. It just had a website, basic functionality. Didn't have any mobile applications, Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, anything. And that was all built on the APIs by the developer ecosystem. Now things have changed, and they've kind of pulled that in, and Twitter owns all those clients. But in the early days, it was all the API. So really, we saw APIs mature on Facebook and Twitter. But like I said, it didn't get real until I was able to deploy databases, storage, now DNS. Basically, Amazon took it from a hobby to something folks like Andy are going to pay attention to at Intel. It went to infrastructure. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Andy. It went to infrastructure, So at this time, 2008, 2009, I'm running SAP Global Events. And I was able to scale servers and deal with a global load across all of these events from Frankfurt to Orlando, Florida, to Southeast Asia, to South America. And I was able to do this with a REST API and a little bit of Java code, execute against the API, and deploy servers around the globe, pull them back in. It was a brand new thing for me, but I saw the potential. This was all programmatic. And then once mobile hit, we started seeing some other things happen. This is when it really saw the potential of APIs. That iPhone in our pockets, that mobile phone, everything on here is driven from APIs. And I saw that potential in 2010. And here we are with Android devices and tablets, everything being driven by APIs. So I saw the potential music, photos, video, Netflix, all that stuff on this device, all being distributed by APIs. We got data too. Data is a pretty important driver right now in the global economy. So we're seeing things like The Guardian for journalism, data.gov, which is the US federal government. We're seeing every federal agency in the US right now deploying APIs to provide access to government data. I was happy when we were at APIDays in Paris. they're doing the same thing there. We're seeing pretty much a global movement around opening up data via APIs for citizen participation. This is very important. This is the heart of the API economy. Sure, I love being able to talk to my friends on Facebook, on Twitter. I love being able to send photos. But this is how we're really going to start changing the world, is opening up data and making government more participatory for citizens. Why did all this work? I mean, I was a heavy SOA, SOAP, kind of enterprise API guy in the early days. So why is this web API stuff working? Why is it different? I kind of feel like APIs are an experiment that got out of the petri dish, the enterprise petri dish, and started going off on its own and growing into something new. So it's simple. That's why it works. Remember that. When you look at Delicious, when you look at the origins of Twitter, it was simple. It wasn't complicated. Even though they are technical, it was very, very simple. So important in anything you do with APIs. Keep it simple. Self-service. I can get on at 3 a.m. in the morning and get to work on something. Have something, something that in my brain, I can't sleep. I get up, I build a prototype, and go to work the next day, prove something works. Self-service, 24/7. It's developer-centric. SOAP, or the whole SOA movement, was very industry-focused, very top-down. This is about developers. APIs and web APIs are about developers, empowering developers, allowing them to solve problems. It's not about products, not about industries or companies. It's about developers building stuff. They're hackable. They're not the most solid, object-oriented, perfect interface like SOAP or other things. That web APIs are imperfect. They're hackable. You can really make things on them. You can tweak URLs. You can do so much with them. That's what makes them work. They're distributed. So it's built on the backbone of the web. The web is the first global scale information system. And APIs use that same infrastructure, so it's scalable. It'll scale. We already proved it with the web. So APIs will scale. And they're built on HTTP, like I said. So it's really not about deploying new technologies. It's not about having to invest in new technologies. It's built on HTTP, which is already proven. So we really have found a kind of sweet spot for the whole tech of APIs. I think we're all in agreement. It's about REST. It's about web APIs. XML, JSON. Those are kind of the core family of API technology. This is what's working. It's very simple technology. But it's more than that. Like I said, it's the business. It's the business of APIs. And what I consider the business of APIs, it's the marketing, it's the documentation, it's the code samples, it's the support, it's the pricing, it's the monetization strategy. There's so much business that goes into it, and I've seen a lot of really well done technically APIs fail because nobody finds it, nobody sees it, nobody understands what it does, nobody's there to support you when you do build something. So the business of APIs is the #1 reason APIs fail. You look at Twitter. Go through Twitter's API ecosystem right now, and I'm not saying Twitter's failing by any means. They're having problems. They're not having problems because of anything technical. They're having problems because they don't communicate with their users. They don't empower their users in their ecosystem. It's not a technical issue. It's a business issue. So as I watch this API universe expand, I'm seeing the need for more attention paid in specific areas. I'm seeing this because I'm seeing products coming out in this area, but I'm also seeing people pay more attention to API design. So I put up visualizing what an API is really hard. I'm always trying to find images. This is what's called a Swagger definition of an API. So it's basically JSON. And this defines, basically the API version, base path, the APIs there, any sort of description of it. This is the closest thing we have to crafting and designing an API. And I'm seeing a lot of people taking a lot more pride in API design. And so I'm not just talking about, oh, here we got an endpoint, post, put, get, delete, we're done. I'm actually crafting the API so you're thinking of the end users. How is this going to be used? Who's going to be using this? I'm putting a lot of thought into the design process around the API. So it's not a technical, it's a very craftsman-like thing now. You're crafting an API, you're designing it with some meaning. There's a little bit of art in there because you have to have the experience and the understanding of how this is going to be used down the road and really put the attention into the detail. So designing of APIs and API design in general is going to be much more important. And you're going to see people stepping up that are specializing in this. API deployment. So this is the number one thing. And we've had a lot of API providers. Got a couple of them in the room here. Mashery, 3Scale, Apigee, Intel, Bordell. There's quite a few of them now. And they all help you manage your API. And only until recently, Layer 7, sorry, Ronnie. And really, I get people in the early days of APIevangelist, people come to me and go, well, how do I deploy my APIs? There wasn't a lot of talk about API deployment. It was all about management. It's all about how you manage your APIs. And a lot of people didn't really understand the intricacies of how to deploy an API, how to use your existing database, how to use your existing internal system. If you have no IT, how do you hire a developer? How do you find an API framework? There's API frameworks out there for Ruby, for Python, for PHP, C#, and deploy an API. There's cloud services now, Apify, Emergent One, that'll basically allow you to just connect to an internal system and immediately launch an API. So there's a lot of tools that'll help you purely with deploying an API, which is, as this universe expands, it's really important to pay attention to design, deployment, to the individual parts and pieces of APIs, not just an overall management. Management is important too. You know, management is where all your business of your APIs will be. This is where your docs are. This is where your API keys. This is where your security is. This is where your branding is around your API. All those essential building blocks that are going to allow you to be successful with your API. It's not just about exposing an endpoint or a URL. It's about making sure that people can use that API, making sure you have intelligent service composition, meaning you've created pricing packages or products that are meaningful to people, work for developer, or either free or they're paid when it makes sense. So really having sensible approach to API management is very important. Monetization. I know so many people who launch APIs have a good technical, a good business strategy. They haven't thought about monetization. Yeah, that'll come down the road. We'll make money somehow. This can really hurt. I mean, I think this is one of the things that really hurt Twitter. It's because Twitter, for the longest time, focused on being the global nervous system and not how they were going to make money. And then we saw in the last 2 years, they've made a lot of effort towards making money. So it kind of disrupted it, where if you approach your API with a healthy monetization strategy in mind, your world's going to be a lot better when you launch your API. Evangelism. This was my favorite part. Getting the word out. It's not marketing your API. That's what, I'm going to say to businesses or customers. But evangelism is really getting out there and explaining, demonstrating what your API does, interacting with developers, working with them to understand what they do, how they're going to do stuff. So really, evangelism is key to building community. Without evangelism and true evangelism around your API, you're not going to actually build a community around your API. And if you do it right, you're going to find evangelists within your community that are going to help get the word out. You're going to have people that are very passionate about your API and actually help you do the marketing and evangelism. Well, let's move beyond kind of, I guess the API deployment or API management. Let's move into, like, as a developer, what I'm going to need. Because this is kind of a full cycle. It's kind of a circle of life. You start with API design, management, monetization, evangelism. community, and then it's about your community discovering your APIs when they're new, discovering other APIs. So we've got to spend a lot more time on discovery and helping people find APIs. If you're familiar with programmable web, they're the kind of old school API directory in the US. We're seeing several others now. We see API Hub, there's the Right API, there's Mashape. There's quite a few that are popping up. I know of a few others that are helping people find APIs, discover APIs. And for someone like me who's been in the space a while, finding a good API is hard. I can type in a programmable web and find 115 image APIs right now that I can't tell you which one of them are worth anything. How, what types of images, whether they're free, so helping me discover APIs is a huge problem. It's something we need to solve and spend a lot more time on. API integration. This is another area we're seeing expanding. I've seen several companies in the last couple weeks launch to help developers with integration. RunScope is one, helping people, developers understand how to integrate with an API. When they do integrate with an API and it breaks, what do you do? What happens? Monitoring APIs, testing of APIs, sandbox environments for APIs. So really empowering developers to develop around APIs is another expanding area right now. There's a lot of need out there, helping developers integrate with APIs, not just the API owner, but everybody. Tools, companies, services. There's a lot more of this right now. Again, I throw API monetization again, because we're on the other side of the loop. Excuse me. Developers have to make money. If developers can't make money, it's not going to be a sustainable integration. So how are we helping developers make money? I know that Epona is a monetization platform. So it's both sides of the coin, right, Andy, as far as helping companies monetize, but helping developers monetize their apps too, right? So this is critical. We're going to see more and more companies like that, more moves by bigger companies like Intel into that area. And then I throw a community up there again, because we're back full cycle. But this is the other side of the coin. It's up to developers to help build community, not be a freeloader on an API. How many have been a freeloader on an API? I have. I've used it for free, set up 3 or 4 email accounts to get the API key so I can get past the limits. I've been a freeloader. So we got to be careful with that. We have to use API sensibly. We have to reach out to the API owners. You can't just go badmouth APIs on Stack Exchange or Hacker News. We actually have to reach out to API owners and help build community. It's important. It's not just up to the API owners to reach out to us. So it's a two-way street. Trends. This is one part that I like. And I think this is critical because a lot of people, I think, with APIs, people tend to think of one API or be focused on, hey, I use Twitter, I use Facebook. But the trends, we're reaching a point now where there's been APIs like eBay and Salesforce. These have been around for over 10 years, over a decade. So we're starting to see some new trends emerge. And if you're going to be successful in the space as an API owner or developer, you got to pay attention to trends. You got to understand what's working, what's not, where we're going. So BaaS is one of my favorite trends right now. Backend as a service, which I don't really care for the name, but it works. So it's about bringing together meaningful stacks of resources to make sure mobile developers are successful. So you have companies like Parse that Facebook just bought. Parse brings together user management, database, file storage, image management, basically all the handful of things you're going to need to build a mobile app. So they're building these custom stacks that are API driven of resources just for mobile developers. I'm seeing ones that emerge that are just for gaming, just for building mobile game apps. I'm seeing ones that are just for travel. So we're seeing backend as a service emerge to help solve the problem of when I'm a developer and I need to build an app, I might need 8 APIs to go around to 8 places and sign up for those keys and get access and understand all 8 of those APIs. It's a lot of work. So backend as a service is doing that work for me, bringing these together into stacks that I can use to be successful. We're going to see backend as a service emerge for other areas, Internet of Things, cars. You're going to see backend as a service for homes, our offices. So this is all about bringing together APIs into one stack. Aggregation. Seeing a lot of API aggregation going on. This is bringing together APIs from multiple sources and putting into a single API. Companies like Singly are doing this around photos, personal data. So I can hit Singly, say, give me my photos. It'll pull my photos from Flickr, from Instagram, from Facebook, give it to me in one API, one object. So it's aggregating multiple APIs for me as a developer. Companies like Atagami are doing this with advertising. So Google Analytics, Facebook Analytics, Twitter, advertising, all of these, bring them together, analytics and advertising into one API stack. I just helped a company launch one for government data. They're doing it, so if you want to pull the budget data for the United States government, you can do it with one API now. But there's 246 federal agencies, all with different APIs. API aggregation is an important thing right now. A lot of these API owners are doing one thing and doing it very well, but aggregators are coming in and bringing that together. Reciprocity. So this, I didn't come up with this word, but I applied it to this area. This is like if this, then that. Zapier. This is about moving data from APIs between APIs and allowing for interoperability. But why I use the word reciprocity is governments have reciprocity agreements. So Spain and the US have reciprocity agreements, exchange, trade, back and forth. And it's not just about the moving of commerce, it's about relationships. So APIs are doing the same thing. It's not that if this, then that moves my RSS, every time my blog posts a new RSS, it adds it to a Google spreadsheet. It's actually adhering to the rules and the terms of use for my blog and Google spreadsheets. So reciprocity agreements of moving data between clouds. Now that we're all living in the clouds, moving data around is gonna be a huge need. But doing it in a way that protects privacy, protects the rights and the interests of companies, moving from both sides, it's critical. So reciprocity platforms are popping up. It's not just if this then that or Zapier. There's like Rules.io. There's a whole bunch of them that are popping up. I think I've counted like 30 of them now. Most of them in the last 3 or 4 months. And what I like about reciprocity is a lot of these platforms aren't for developers. They're for everyone, meaning anyone who's a non-developer can move stuff between Dropbox and Salesforce, Google Apps and Salesforce. So non-developers are being able to use APIs, which is really cool. I think is very important. Real time. Keeping things real time. You got companies like Pusher and PubNub that are developing API-driven real-time tools. So a lot of these APIs don't have time to build in webhooks or build in real-time features into the APIs. Providers are stepping up and doing it for companies. So allowing you, when something gets published to a new place, it'll do the webhook for you and push it out to you. People are doing change management within apps. So every time you push a new version of your mobile app, there's a whole real-time push notification that goes out to anybody in that mobile app food chain. You know, from the advertisers, from the developers, everyone gets some sort of notification. And this is all part of the development cycle. So real-time is very important. You're going to see more providers stepping up to make things real-time and kind of satisfy that hunger for real-time data. Scripting, WebShell. Platforms like WebShell are building entirely new scripting approaches on top of APIs. So yeah, you can script against one API, but with companies like WebShell and with Google Apps Script, you can program against multiple APIs seamlessly. So you can write one line of code that'll pull all your Twitter followers. You can another line of code, it'll take that and compare it with all the restaurants you've eaten. So with 2 or 3 lines of code, you can generate a map very easily, where before you would have to deal with the authentication across those 3 platforms. You'd have to grab the client libraries from each of those places. Scripting platforms are really simplifying this for us. Voice. This one's not quite there. I mean, we hear a lot about Siri. I know apiculture's approaching it from their end, but there's a lot of, thank you, appreciate that. There's a lot of need around voice. This is how we're going to connect the web. And if your products and your services are not available via APIs, they're not going to be available via these voice enabled devices. So voice is something we have to pay attention to. It's a reason why you should have APIs, but you should also think about how you're going to engage with these platforms. There's platforms emerging like Zipper from, I think they're in Japan, that are building just API-driven aggregate platforms. So voice is a very critical part of the equation. This one I just added this last week, single-page apps. I don't know if you're familiar with single-page apps or SPAs, but a lot of sites you see nowadays you'll go to, and you click on the navigation and it just drops down to that next level. With JavaScript, it'll just throw you down. It's a single-page website. It'll have like 7 sections, but every time you click on a section, it just drops you down lower. APIDays is a single-page app. So a lot of these single-page apps are being driven from JavaScript libraries like Backbone, like Ember, and the potential for integrating APIs into these libraries and frameworks natively or as add-ons, I think there's a huge potential there, and I'm seeing a lot of discussion around how we can start bundling APIs in here. So paying attention to single-page apps and APIs, you're going to see a lot more coming down the road with that. Cars and automobiles, this is a pretty exciting area. But, getting my RDO, getting my music, everything in my car now. You see Ford, GM, BMW all have their own API platforms now. You see platforms that are rising up just to deliver to this market. And so automobiles and APIs. Most of the automobile companies, BMW have had APIs for a long time, but they're internal. But now they're opening it up to us to develop our homes. So you got a thermostat, you got heating and air conditioning, your refrigerator, all of this. I was talking to Netflix. They're starting to deliver video content to refrigerators so you don't miss the movie when you walk into your kitchen. So all of this is API driven. It's kind of weird. But, and this is going to sync with our cars. So when you're driving home, you can turn on the lights. Philips has some amazing lighting APIs, so you can control your lighting systems with APIs. So when you're driving home, you can make sure your house is warm and your lights are on and things are started. So APIs are fueling all of that and opening up innovation. So it's not just the companies delivering stuff to us, it's about us developers getting involved too. Buildings. You got Johnson Controls, you got a lot of different companies popping up with the heating and air conditioning, making smart buildings. They're retrofitting old products, old heating and air conditioning, old building management systems to have APIs now, because they're finding that they can outsource that to their developer community and allow them to build the next generation of automated and smart buildings. So you're going to see a lot more APIs serving our cities. And I know, once it's going to be building by building, but eventually our cities are going to be a lot smarter. Quantified self, body media, Fitbit. I actually lost my Fitbit in APIDays Paris. I was bummed if anybody found it. But tracking where you walk. My girlfriend tracks every step she walks, everything she eats. And it's kind of opened up her eyes to different parts of her life that she thought of differently. We go to New York a lot. And when we go to New York, we're always really tired. So we walk a lot, right? We take the subway, we take the bus. But it turns out we walk like 8 times more in Los Angeles than I did in New York, which doesn't make sense, but it's true. And we knew it because of the data, pulled it via the API. So we're quantifying ourselves and understanding ourselves better through APIs. And this is opening up a whole new world for medical professionals, doctors, to tap into who we are and give us more control and give us more accountability over our own health through quantified self. 3D printing and manufacturing, this is still in its early phases, but most of the providers like MakerBot and Shapeways are building out API networks so that when 3D printers come of age, we have a global manufacturing network of printers on demand. Think of the little town investing in 3D printers and plugging into a global network, and all we do is print, say like the knobs on your kitchen cabinets. For IKEA, they just print one of them. That's all this town does. And every time you need one, they fire up the printer and they print it and ship it. So very specialized niche 3D printing and manufacturing by APIs. But now I want to move us into the priorities and get a little bit more serious because I don't work for anyone. I don't have to sell any products. I have some priorities that are important to me that we need to pay attention to. Government, like I said, APIs and government is my #1 priority. Opening up our data and opening up our governments, making them more accountable, fixing our budget crisis through APIs and more accountability for government, but also more accountability for us. We need to step up and get involved, and APIs are going to enable that. Cities, so automating buildings and homes, but city data, fixing city problems, potholes, infrastructure problems, allowing us to report it via our mobile phones using APIs. So interacting with our cities via APIs, priority. Libraries. I'm seeing some interesting stuff coming out of libraries as far as becoming new digital centers, trying to reinvent themselves, deploying their own API infrastructure, deploying their own hacker spaces. So turning our libraries and community centers into API-driven innovation centers. So think startups and incubation, but happening at the city level in our libraries. Universities, opening up, so your student information system, your registration, everything is API-driven. Students are building the apps on these APIs. Working with UC Berkeley to do some pretty innovative stuff around APIs, opening up all of their university systems so that developers can build apps, mobile apps, open it up, build reports. Pretty critical area. Education, another area outside of university, at the all levels of from when you first enter school to when you retire, lifelong learning. Should be able to get at all the content, everything you need via APIs. We're seeing a lot of companies step up to offer online accreditation, online courses, all API driven. Healthcare is a tough one. It's not going to be easy, but quantified self, other things are going to help this. The APIs are going to help open up our medical records, help provide a little bit more transparency into what healthcare costs. In the US, this is a big problem because you never know what it's going to cost you until it's done. So opening up data with APIs is pretty critical. But all of this, I see the API space being 3 main parts: the technical, the business, and then what I call the politics. And Mehdi talks a lot about this, and a lot of us are trying to form thoughts around this. Politics is everything from the terms of service, which I don't know about here in Spain or the EU, but in the US, your rights and privacy, everything's being determined on that checkbox you check when you sign up for an app. You're giving away your data. You're giving away rights to your photos. Instagram had, for a while there, the right to put your photos into their advertising without your permission. So the politics of APIs, from that checkbox terms of service, from branding, from privacy guidelines, all the way up to government level regulation around APIs. I work with the Electronic Frontier Foundation on the Google versus Oracle case, where Oracle is trying to copyright APIs. I provided a lot of the research for that project. I worked with the federal agencies in the U.S. To understand privacy and rights by APIs, so people don't get taken advantage via these API ecosystems. So we have a lot of work to do here. You got to really think about security. Security is number one with APIs. It's not an afterthought. It's something you got to do right away. It's got to be part of your early strategy. Visibility. APIs aren't about doing things behind closed doors. APIs, even if it's a private or partner API, there's still a certain amount of visibility that has to happen and be part of your API strategy. It can be painful sometimes. That transparency is going to build that community with your users, with your developers. You share a little bit of your roadmap for your company and your API and where you're going with your developers. They're going to know what they can build and what they can't. And you're going to prevent some of the ecosystem battles that we've seen in Twitter, between Twitter and its developers, between Facebook and their developers, and what's called ecosystem poaching. So someone builds something neat in an API, the company likes that, they just take that idea and do it themselves. Got a lot of issues with transparency in APIs. It can open up a lot of doors, though, or windows in this case. Interoperability is so important. Everything's got to work together. So when you're building your APIs, you're using APIs, always think about interoperability. And then, like I said, reciprocity. It's not just about moving the data. It's about respecting, that you're not just moving a photo from here to there. It could be a photo of my daughter. I have a 13-year-old daughter. So you as a developer, when you're building those APIs or building that app and you're moving that photo from cloud system to cloud system, you got to think about people's privacy and think about what is going through those pipes. Very important. Terms of use. This is just the biggest area, biggest problem with APIs and companies taking advantage of it. And I blame Silicon Valley, and I'm from the West Coast, and Silicon Valley's feeding a lot of this and taking people's data, and it's potentially hurting the API space. So when we're opening up APIs, we have to be open and honest and transparent about our terms of use. Don't try to pull one over on customers. Be open and honest. You may have to change your terms of use down the road as your company evolves, but be open and honest and transparent about this. Don't just speak in legalese, as I call it. Privacy, I already talked about this one. It's critical. Copyright. I don't think we're going to be able to copyright APIs. I think in the U.S. it was close. They almost got it past us where they were able to copyright API interfaces or design. This is one of the most potentially damaging things. I think in the EU, you guys are pretty safe and comfortable. Open source. Use open source. And then end it on this. When you're building APIs, APIs are about three-legged conversations. So this is borrowed from OAuth. And this is the power behind OAuth. Have conversations with your developers. Think about your users. Right now, most API platforms are leaning towards the platform provider. So Twitter has all of the rights and the ownerships. Facebook, Google's. Developers tend to have a little bit more because they get access, but the terms of use limit that. But we have to think of the user, the third part of the leg. So three-legged conversations in all API design, management, deployment, monetization, all of it. You got to equally consider all three parts of the equation or it's not going to work. It's three legs, and it's like a stool. Eventually, if one leg's too weak, it's going to collapse. So when you plan your APIs, have lots of three-legged conversations. And I'm pretty confident we can do all this. I'm not too worried about it. I'm watching the space. I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing across the board. But we definitely need to have a lot more conversations about all these areas, pay attention to the trends, and really be mindful as this universe expands, what works and what doesn't, and just be open and honest about it. So that's pretty much all I got.
Wow, so wide knowledge about API's landscape. I think this is the best launch you could do for talking about what we will talking today. Now it's time for question. Yes, as Eduardo said, speak to speakers, speak with you. Anybody is there any question to Kin Lane? He's come. Is there any question? Andy? Yeah, I will give you the mic. Yeah.
One of the things I want to have a larger debate with you sometime is the newer set of APIs and the models. Those are built for different kind of transactions, but then still layers on top of the age-old broken HTTP platform. Are you seeing a lot of movement, especially given the IoTs coming in, the M2Ms coming in, a lot of corporations moving out of, or a lot of models moving out of the HTTP traffic into different ways and means of mechanisms? And how fast do you see it going, and what do you think is going to solidify going into the future?
Refresh.
Repeat the question. You know, web APIs or REST APIs are just kind of the current phase we're in. You know, we've come from SOAP and SOA, hardware APIs. I mean, there's Java APIs. And so I can't speak to any specific technologies. I mean, I know there's people playing with, you know, WebSockets, which is still kind of HTTP transport. Daniel from Netflix is talking about what they're doing as far as moving beyond REST APIs. So, you know, APIs to me don't describe web APIs. It describes more of an approach. So there are other trends with technologies that will be coming out. I don't think HTTP is going to be very long-lived. I think we're going to find other ways to communicate with APIs pretty quick. I don't know what those are. I'm going to try to keep my eye on them and communicate in real time, and hopefully we'll find other solutions. But it's a tough one because I think other ones are going to have a hard time getting traction. I mean, I think that's why HTTP worked, is because it's not one provider, one technology. It's one standard, and so we'll see.
One more question. Ladies first.
Hi, I'm working for a bank, and we are seriously thinking about to build an API and open it to the community. What do you think about this? Do you think it's a bank, a company that has to build an open API or not because of the security and that stuff?
For the streaming.
Yeah, for banks, you know, any financial company, it's going to be tough. But I don't know what sort of regulations you have here in Spain, but there's some pretty strict ones in the U.S. So APIs can actually help with that. You know, can actually help with some of that auditing of your process and accountability to the government. But then I'm also seeing banks stepping up. I can't mention, but I'm working with one right now who want to build a social banking platform with APIs. And they're a major global bank, and they want to open up APIs so they can have social lending between families and communication around, you know, starting a business within your family circle, and that micro lending and just that social community part around, you know, around banking, but bring it into the cloud. And, you know, social with Twitter and Facebook, bring the elements of social, bring the elements of the cloud, scalability, distributed. So I think it does make sense for banks to do it, small or large. I would hope that someone steps up with a banking platform to help smaller banks do it on their own, you know, or do it easy without having to, you know, build their own tools. But it's definitely going to be scary because with security, I mean, I'm not a security expert. You know, Andy's the guy on that. But it's a scary world. That's, you know, the two questions I get from people with new APIs is one, security, and two, you know, branding or giving away everything because it's just, here it is, take it. You know, they're worried they're just giving away all of their assets or information. So security is scary. And it's another area we just got to have lots of conversations about and get experts in the game. So.
Other question, but this is why we have WSO2 and Intel as partner, talking about this question about security. Go through them. Yeah.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for coming and giving us the opportunity to take advantage of all the knowledge. This extends to all of the other presenters. Thank you. One of the advantages I think of APIs is the openness, the sense of that gives, sorry, and the sense of distribution of knowledge. One of the biggest problems today. Okay, just all right. Maybe one of the biggest problems and things that interfere with that, touched before, the terms of service, the terms of conditions, the legal rights, and the companies trying to protect their obviously their business and the privacy of data. How can interfere?
How can developers step up and be more of an activist in the whole, privacy, terms of use, the politics of APIs? And I say yes. One, step up. Developers are the most closed off people. They'll whine and complain on Twitter, whine and complain on Hacker News, and I used to be one. I'm a developer, so when I say developers, I'm talking about me. It's hard. You have to step up and work together, communicate, talk. When people like me, that's my role. I'm working to be the lightning rod in the space and talk about these issues, talk about how, the good people, because there are APIs that have good terms of use, good privacy policy, good deprecation policies, when they're going to close it down, good communication strategies. And those are the ones that I showcase and I talk about and I tell the stories around. And then when people are doing bad things, I showcase that. And as a developer, people can step up and intelligently comment on my posts, not, some of the other stuff I get. We just need healthy conversations. And that's why I ended on the three-legged conversations, is because I know so many API platforms who don't talk to their developer community at all. And their developers are the same way. They won't even comment on the forum or tweet at the API. They'll go to Hacker News or Stack Exchange and complain and report a problem. That's not healthy. You need to step up and say, look, your API, it works great, but your privacy is bad. And so we need to come up with better ways that we can pool together and take on, some of the biggest companies, because they will change. And I think that's with Twitter right now. One of the things I'm trying to do is get them to change their rate limiting policy, listen to developers a little bit more, and communicate. But we've had such a problem with developers, with just saying really mean things, really off the wall. We need to come together and have intelligent conversations. Go to the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation website today. They just launched the paper that we filed with the federal courts in the U.S. I worked on for the last 6 months. But it was like 30 of us developers working over the last 6 months to come up with language of why Oracle shouldn't be able to copyright this, because it played out in one courts and now it's in the federal courts in the U.S. So us developers got together and worked on this with the lawyers, and then the lawyers did it. So we just need to work together more, and developers need to stop being closed off, and realize we're using multiple APIs now. So we have to talk about multiple APIs. That's all we got. I'm going to be hanging out all day, guys, and tomorrow. So if you want to talk to me directly, you can.
Thank you, Kin. Thank you. Okay, can I applause?
So now it's time for coffee break, which will be there. And we'll be back in 30 minutes, I think, at 11:45. And we'll be starting the sessions concerning the business of APIs.